Hi everyone, Kelly here, and today I have kind of a special version of my recent reads. So normally when I do a recent reads, I just sit down and review all the books I read recently, but this one is going to be themed and it's going to be a little more vlog style. So it's all based around a book that is coming out in March called 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson, and this is a thriller which is about a bookseller who loves the mystery genre, so he creates this list of the best unsolvable crimes from past literature, and then the FBI comes to his door one day and says that somebody is committing murders based on this list. So obviously the bookseller becomes a suspect, and this just sounds like a book right on my alley because it's a thriller about the mystery book genre, about a bookseller, about books. Sounds great, but the problem is that I hate being spoiled for books inside of other books. So I think that if I'm going to read this book, I need to read all of the 8 perfect murders that he is talking about, especially because if they really are these great murders and like unsolvable crimes and stuff, then they should be really good books, and they're classics, most of them. So I went about looking for all 8 of these stories, and I'm going to read them. So the way I'm going to do this recent reads is that every time I finish a book, I'm going to review it here. So it'll be a little vlog style on the fact that we're doing it that way, but I'm not going to like do a full-on vlog. I'm just going to come and tell you about the book each time I finish one. So really quickly, I want to just tell you what the 8 books are that I'm going to read. There was one I could not find a physical copy for, so I ended up having to buy it on Kindle. That book is The Drowner by John MacDonald. And so this one I'll be reading on my Kindle, and the rest of these I got from the library. The only book on this list I have read is The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie, but I didn't remember exactly how the murder wrapped up in this one. I remember most of it, but I figured I would just get the book and read like the last 3 chapters to be reminded of how it ended up. And then I have The Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne, who, yes, is the author of Winnie the Pooh. I guess he also wrote a really great mystery book. And then I have Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. And then we also have Malice, Aforethought by Frances Iles. And Deathtrap by Ira Levin. This is actually a play. And then Double Indemnity by James M. Cain. And then the last one is the most current one and the most popular, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I had been planning to unhaul this and not read it, but then when I saw it was one of the 8 perfect murders in that book, I thought I would at least give it a try. So if I end up DNFing this one, it's fine because I wasn't really interested in it, but seeing as it's part of this project, I'm gonna at least try it. So luckily, most of these books are really short, except for The Secret History. The rest of them all seem to be pretty small. So I'm gonna read them and I'm gonna come back and tell you what I think of each of these. All right, so I have finished 2 of the books. I finished them in one afternoon, but they were the shortest on the list, so that's probably why. The first one I read was Double Indemnity by James M. Cain, and this is really short. It's only like 115 pages, my version. But this was a lot of fun. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and this is written in the 1930s, and so it definitely has that classic noir fiction kind of feel to it. I ended up listening to the audiobook, which was a great choice. If you're gonna read this, you should do the audiobook. It's short, and it's got the guy that narrates it has that totally noir voice, that like almost private detective voice. There's no private detective, but he has that voice that you imagine from noir films. And it also has that noir film music that kind of comes in sometimes, like at the beginning of the book and throughout it a little bit. And so it really had the atmosphere of the noir film type thing. And so I loved listening to it. I really enjoyed this. I mean, there is, because it was written in the 1930s and is of the like noir style, it definitely has some like sexist elements in it. Like from the very beginning, the main character in this like sees a woman and of course going to comment on her figure, falls for her right away. She's pictured as the femme fatale type character throughout this. So yes, there is some like sexist elements, but I kind of expected that with like a 1930s noir style book. So that might be why I didn't give it a full 5 stars. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It's got a lot of twists and turns that just keep it interesting. And since it's short, I don't want to tell a lot. But basically, it's just about this man who's an insurance agent, which you could probably tell from the title, who goes to like sell some insurance, like some car insurance to a man. But he's not home, and he ends up talking to the man's wife. And things go from there. I don't want to say anything else, because like I said, just one thing after another happens in this book. I understand why he picked this for his new book about like an unsolvable crime, because the crime in this is really interesting. I mean, you'd think that like being written in the 30s that we would have seen like in that time. I mean, that's almost 100 years ago, and 80 years ago or whatever, and like a lot of fiction has happened in that, a lot of crimes, but I felt that the crime in here was still really original sounding and interesting to listen to. So I still would recommend this book. It's very short. Check out the audiobook if you want that kind of classic noir feel. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. And then the next one I read was Deathtrap by Ira Levin. This is a play, so it went by really fast to read. And I love this. I gave this 5 stars. I also really like these kind of plays. Like it's a play that has like comedy and death and murder and betrayal and all that stuff happening. But this is basically a play within a play. So this play is about a playwright who is given this play called Deathtrap from like a young man that he has like been mentoring, and he's like, oh, this play is amazing, I wish it was mine. And he gets this idea to like kill this playwright in order to steal his idea, because he's running out of like new ideas and he wants to keep fresh and all that stuff. So it's totally a play within a play within a play kind of thing. And it's funny. It's like crazy stuff happens. So like murder and chaos and all kinds of things. It was a lot of fun. To the very end was just a lot of fun, because you think like all this stuff happens in the first act, like what could happen in the second act, but it just gets crazier. So I would recommend reading this or watching it. I'm sure there's a movie version of this somewhere. I don't know for sure, but since it was from like the 70s, I'm for sure that you could find a version of it in like either a play or a movie online. There's got to be something, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. All right, so I just finished the next book, Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. And this book took me forever to read. I mean, not really, it was a week, but like after reading the first 2 books in this project in one day, a week felt like forever. And the reason is I just wasn't like really loving this book. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It had a really great concept. It just wasn't like all that interesting throughout. It got really boring. So the basic concept of this book is that at the very beginning, there's 2 guys, strangers, who meet on a train. The one guy invites the other to his private car to have a drink, and they are just chatting, and they're like totally opposites. One guy, his name is Guy. He's just like your average guy. How many times am I say the word guy in this? But he's just an average guy who's an architect, has a good job, has a girlfriend that loves him, that hopefully he's planning on marrying and all this stuff. And like, so he just is an average person. And then we've got Bruno, who's just kind of a drunk and lives off of his parents' money. As far as I know from reading the book, he doesn't work. He just kind of lazes around and drinks a lot. And so they're kind of complete opposites, but they just meet one day on this train and start talking about the people that they both hate. So they each have a person in their life that they really hate, and they're complaining about those people. And then Bruno suddenly gets this idea, hey, how about we kill those people for each other? And since we have no connection to each other other than this train, we're complete strangers, nobody would suspect us. It would be the perfect murder. And Guy kind of laughs it off like, haha, yeah, funny idea, you drunkard, whatever. And that's the basic setup for this book. The concept was great, but the execution got boring. Like the first half of the book, I was really invested, but by about halfway through, I just completely lost interest. I probably might not even have finished this book if it hadn't been for this project, because I was just like really making myself finish it. It just got boring. But I'm not gonna say it's like a 2-star, because I think that the concept is really great, and I did kind of enjoy where it went in terms of the psyche of these two guys and like how this one encounter kind of spirals and infects their entire lives and relationships and everything. And it was an interesting analysis of the mind and how like good and evil and people's motivations and all that stuff. So I'll give her that, but I just personally didn't like love it. So it was more like a 3-star mediocre read for me. All right, so we've got a couple more books. So I finished The Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne. And like I said earlier, this is the author of Winnie the Pooh. And this was basically just a very simple, cozy mystery. It very much felt like he was kind of doing his version of Sherlock Holmes kind of mystery. It's about, at the very beginning, I'm trying to think of how to describe this because it's very short. I don't want to give away too much. So basically, at the beginning of this book, there's a bunch of people that are staying at the Red House and a shot is heard and somebody dies. And we kind of, after that, are following 2 men who are staying at the Red House to solve the murder. Neither of them are detectives. They're just average guys. They're like, hey, I can solve a mystery. And I think that the author was also kind of doing almost a little parody of Sherlock Holmes, because they even like talk about Holmes and Watson, like call each other Holmes and Watson sometimes in there. And so there is some humor put in there into the story that I enjoyed, but overall I didn't love this. I think that it just fell flat, like especially since right after this I read a Sherlock Holmes mystery, and just the like, I don't know, the life and charm and character that's in like a Holmes mystery just wasn't present in this. The guys didn't have really much personality at all, and I think that's what carries a cozy mystery of this form, is like liking the detectives, and these guys were just boring. So I gave it 3 stars. I understand why Peter Swanson picked this as one of the 8 perfect murders, because the actual conclusion to the murder is clever. Obviously, I'm not gonna tell you what that is. And I thought it was clever. I did like guess it, but I think of the time, it probably would have been a really unique way of like doing a mystery and a very, you know, like, oh, big surprise. So I do understand why it's picked as one of the perfect murders, because it was a really good twist at the end. And then I also brushed up on the ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. I had read this a couple years ago, and I just didn't remember what the big twist was for reading the book coming up. And so I just basically read the last, like, I don't know, 50 pages of this book, because if you've ever read an Agatha Christie novel, basically there's always a big info dump at the end. So you don't necessarily need to have read the whole thing recently to catch on pretty quickly. So for those that do want to read it, the basic premise of this is it's a Poirot mystery, and there is somebody that's killing people in alphabetical order, which is why it's the ABC murders. So the first person's name starts with an A, and they live in a town that starts with A, and it keeps going. And yeah, Poirot's just sent in to solve it. He's actually contacted by the murderer, so the murderer brings Poirot into the investigation, and it goes from there. So I reread the end of this to remind myself what the big twist was, why this would be a perfect murder. I do think it's interesting. When I read it originally, I had given it 4 stars and thought it was a really good one of the Poirot mysteries, and so I would recommend it. Hey, so I know you can't tell that how long has been from one clip to another. I didn't know if I said at the beginning of the video that I started this project of reading all of the Perfect Murder books back in February. Well, now it's April 4th, and I haven't read I just finished a book, but the last time I updated you was probably almost a month ago. And I'm sure all of you know what has happened in the meantime and why I might have fallen off of this challenge, and because coronavirus happened and the world kind of went crazy. But I'm starting now to get back to normal life in terms of reading and being able to focus a little more now. Yeah, nothing's gotten better, but it's just that I think, you know, you can only stay at that heightened level of anxiety for so long. And now I'm just starting to like try to get back to my normal pattern of life. So yeah, I went back to this project and I'm going to continue finishing off because I have 3 books left to read, and I have the book 8 Perfect Murders now from the library. So I have it ready to read whenever I finish reading those 3 books. So I read one more. So I finished The Drowner by John MacDonald. This was written a long time ago. I don't remember if it was like in the 70s or what, but it definitely is like a pulp fiction, private detective type story. And I wasn't getting into it at first. It was very boring. It moved really slow. It just was introducing a lot of characters at the beginning and in a very long, drawn out way of like describing them and every single little thing they did and all that stuff. So it took me probably half of the book before I got like interested at all. So, you know, with everything else that was going on, reading a book that isn't capturing my attention was hard. But then something happened about halfway through the book that just like totally was like, did not expect that. And obviously I'm not gonna tell you what it is because that would be a spoiler, but I was just like shook, and then it made me like interested to continue the book. And that's what like got me to finish this book and got me out of my like reading rut, was just like something happened I did not expect, and it captivated me. And the rest of the book went by so fast because I was just like, wow, he really like put a shocker in there. So that's why I'm giving it 3 stars, because I was like bored out of my mind in the first half of the book, but the second half of the book was really good. And I'm glad I read it before I was spoiled for it, because I haven't been shocked like that in any book, like even a modern book, crime book, in a long time. Okay, so I have finally read all of the 8 murders and 8 Perfect Murders. So it took a little while, longer than I thought. I blame coronavirus because I started this project in January, thought it would take 2 months to read all the books, but you all know what happened in March. So I am finally done and just have to read the actual book. So just to tell you about the last couple books. So first of all, I have The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and I actually DNF'd this one. I just decided that I couldn't do it. I originally was just going to get rid of this book. Before this project, I had already planned on getting rid of this book, just from the reviews and things like that. I just didn't think it was going to be for me, but with this project, I thought I would give it a try. I made it about 100 pages in. Yeah, about 100 pages in, and I was just bored out of my mind. I don't know. I just don't really go for the whole like pretentious higher education kind of slow murder mystery. It's just not my thing. And the thought of having to get through, I was listening to the audiobook, and the audiobook is like, I don't know, 25 hours, something like that, and I'd only made it a few hours in, and that just seemed like way too much to have to do. So yeah, I'm DNFing this, so I don't mind if I get spoiled for it. And then the last one that I read is called Malice, Aforethought by Francis Iles. And I believe this is a pen name, so you might have heard it with a different author name. And this one is my least favorite so far. So I'm ending off with the least favorite. I only gave it 2 stars. So basically what this is it is it's not a murder mystery, because you know from the very first line that our main character, Edmund, is going to kill his wife. Like, that's the first line of the book. And then we are just following him and his mindset as he plans his wife's murder and kind of decides what he's going to do and how he's going to get away with it, and then the aftermath and all that stuff. So it's basically just kind of a, you know, like following along a murderer and seeing the thought process, the psyche, all that stuff. And this was written in 1931, and at the time, I think it was just like a big hit, because I think it must have been one of the first times that the books really like wanted to see from the side of the murderer instead of following like a detective or something like that and solving a murder, because there's nothing to solve. We're just kind of seeing how he does it. And I think that concept was great. And going into it, I thought it was going to be good. But I think because of it being written in 1931, one, it was very slow. And because we are in this man's mind, His view of women and the stuff that he says and does to women is just really hard to take in modern time. In the 1930s, it probably wasn't very offensive, but yeah, it's like all the time. Like he, you know, obviously doesn't like his wife, but it's not even about that. It's about, like, in one of the very first scenes, he like gets himself alone with a young woman and kind of pushes himself on her, and even after like she's saying no, he's like, oh well, there must be something wrong with that lady, there couldn't be anything wrong with me, or why wouldn't somebody want to kiss me or be with me or whatever. And that's just how it goes on for the rest of the book. And I get that it's part of his personality, that he is overly confident and is like compensating for his feelings of inadequacy by being overly confident. But yeah, it just gets really tiring to read and isn't very much fun. So even though the concept is really interesting, I didn't find the reading process enjoyable. And then there is a twist ending, and a lot of people say, like in the comments, that the ending is what makes it worth reading. So that's why I pushed through. I almost DNF'd this book. And for me, the ending was not worth it. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading this book. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go read 8 Perfect Murders, and I'm not going to review it in this video, but I will come back and tell you whether I think it was worth it for me to have read all of the 8 books before reading this. All right, so I finally finished 8 Perfect Murders, and I'm not going to talk about what I thought about this book here. I'm going to do a dedicated review. I'm going to post it at the same time as this video, so it's already up, and I'll link it down below so you can find out what I thought about this. But what I wanted to tell you here to end out this video is whether I thought it was worth it to read all of the books in preparation for this book, and which ones I think that you should read if you are planning on reading this and you are interested in any of the books that are spoiled in this book. So first of all, I don't regret having chosen to read all the 8 books, even though there were books that I didn't love. I think it made my reading experience of this book more rich, just having had read those books, and just it was a fun experiment overall, so I don't regret it. But I wouldn't say that you need to read all of them. Some are just not as interesting as others, and some don't play as big of a part in the novel as others. So my suggestion would be, just based on if you watching this video and seeing which books I liked, the 2 books that I liked the best and I think are just really good and worthwhile reading so you don't get spoiled for them by reading 8 Perfect Murders are Deathtrap by Ira Levin, which is a play, and I've heard that the movie is very close to the play, so if you can't get a hold of a play, what's it called? Script, because they do sometimes have the scripts and stuff available at the library, but if you can't get a hold of that, you could watch the movie, and I'm sure it'll be just as entertaining as reading the play, and I think that one's worthwhile. It was a lot of fun to read, and I just think it'd be better going into it not knowing some of the spoilery things you learn in 8 Perfect Murders. The other one I really enjoyed and was not on my radar at all was Double Indemnity, and I can't remember what the author of that is. I will put a picture of it here. You heard me talk about this. This is a noir book, and I just thought that the murder was really fun, the way they planned it and the way it was executed, and this book was just really enjoyable. It's a short book. I would highly suggest the audiobook. I think it was just a few hours long, so I finished it very quickly. It just happens to be the 2 books that I really loved and recommend are the first 2 I read in the series of books that I read. The other one that I think is important to read, even though it wasn't one of my favorites, is Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. And the reason I say that is because I would say of all the books spoiled in this one, that one is talked about in more detail. And so I think you would have a more richer experience reading this book if you have read Strangers on a Train. It's not required. Like, he explains everything that you need to know from that book in this current book, but I just think I liked hearing about it more, having read it, because that book really is about the psychology of committing murder and these 2 people, you know, meeting randomly and choosing to do that. And I think that this current book, this new book, really does delve into the psychology of murder and being a murderer and all that stuff. So I think that they are a good parallel. So I would suggest reading that one if you want a richer reading experience. I don't think any of the other of the books are needed, though if any of them sound interesting to you, it's not like minor spoils in this book. It is like telling you who the murderer is and how they did it. So if any of the books that I read in this video sound interesting to you, definitely read them before reading 8 Perfect Murders. But I'm just telling you the ones I loved were Double Indemnity and Deathtrap, and I would still suggest Strangers on a Train as the 3 you should read. One more thing I want to say before I finish this off is that besides the 8 books that I reviewed in this video, he also majorly spoils one other popular book. I say popular because it's Agatha Christie. He also spoils The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, which is a Hercule Poirot book. I luckily read this book 2 weeks before reading 8 Perfect Murders, because it's not said anywhere really that this is spoiled, because I mean, you know that the 8 Perfect Murders, you can look up a list of those books and know these are going to be spoiled in the newer book, but it doesn't say that this book would be spoiled because it's not on the list of 8 Perfect Murders. He just uses it as an example of, like, I don't know, crime fiction or whatever at some point in the book, and he tells you who the murderer is and why it's a clever twist. And I loved this book and thought that the reveal of the murderer was the best part of reading it. And so if you are somebody who has been enjoying reading Agatha Christie or think you might want to get into that, make sure you read this book before you read this book. So those are my final suggestions. Hopefully this was entertaining. Sorry, I meant for this to come out much closer to the release date. This came out in March, and I wanted this video to come out more like April or something like that. But we all know the last few months have been a little bit unusual. So I'm glad I finally finished this project. I'm glad I saw it through to the very end and finally finished 8 Perfect Murders. And I would love to talk to you down below if you've read any of these books, or if you want to chat more about how they show up in the newer book or whatever. I would love to hear from you some more, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.